I will show you right now how you can check the switches in the cell phone motherboard. Set the multimeter to the buzzer option and there press the power button. The switch contains two pins, the ground and the high pin, the pin where we have voltage. This is the ground, so this is the high pin as you can see. If I press the switch, as you can see, I hear a buzzer, okay? Or I get a continuity as you can see in the multimeter. So when you press the switch, as you can see, we get a low resistance in the multimeter. Means the switch is worked correctly. How you can know if an IC in the cell phone motherboard is failed or not? How can we check the IC? By checking the heat of this IC using your finger. If the IC is very hot, means the IC is bad. Or you can check these capacitors, these ceramic capacitors around the IC. These ceramic capacitors should not be shorted in both sides. Okay? If we check this capacitor with the ground, let's check here in this side, it's okay, it is connected to the ground, but in the second side it should not be connected to the ground, as you can see. Good, so the IC is good. Cell phone camera fault. What is the cell phone camera fault? Basically, the cell phone camera fault is the connector, as you can see. This connector. This is the power connector. Okay? As you can see, we have here the power connector. Okay? Basically, this is the main failure in many cell phone. As you can see also here, in this motherboard, this is the power connector, this is the power connector. Okay, so always you should check if you get a motherboard with this problem. Usually you should replace this connector, but sometimes the connector can be good. You should just check the soldering here. Okay, you should just check the soldering and check also this part, the ground or the negative part should be connected. Okay, this is the first failure that every technician can get a lot with the cell phone motherboard. The second, of course, is the battery connector. The battery connector, these terminals or pins, as you can see, can be broken. Even if you have here, for example, you see that these pins are good, but it can be broken in this side. So always you should check these connectors and also check the soldering of this. The same also for the seam connector. These pins can be broken inside or can be deformed or distorted. Also you should check this soldering. The same also for this. Okay, the third problem that I get a lot is the switches. As you can see, these switches are easy to be broken. Okay, so these switches also can be broken. Also, you should check the switches, the soldering of the switches. Okay, the soldering of the switches. So the other problem is with the connectors, as you can see. Like for example in this motherboard, as you can see, these naps or these connectors can be cutted. So you should always pay attention when you manipulate or when you deal with these connectors. As you can see, you should always pay attention when you deal with this connector. Okay, always pay attention, because among the common failure of the cell phone motherboard is this connectors, as you can see. Okay, and of course also you should pay attention to this soldering for the battery soldering and the CMOS battery soldering also. Of course, the other problem is the ICs. The ICs can be shorted, especially the power management IC or the power IC. So that's why you should always check the ceramic capacitor around the IC. If you get a shorted motherboard, always you should check the chemical capacitors around the IC. If you find any ceramic or the ceramic capacitors around the IC, if you find any ceramic capacitor shorted to the ground in both sides, means the IC is bad. You can also check the IC using your finger. If you find a hot IC, means the IC is bad. You should replace it. Okay? Now I will show you how to check the ICs. How you can know if an IC in the cell phone motherboard is failed or not. As you can see, we don't have here any pins or connectors. How can we check the IC? By checking the heat of this IC using your finger. If the IC is very hot, means the IC is bad. Or you can check these capacitors, these ceramic capacitors around the IC. These ceramic capacitors should not be shorted in both sides. Okay? So I will show you how. So first you should put the multimeter to the buzzer option and then press the power button. So as you can see, to check this IC, I can just check this capacitor, as you can see here. Here, this is, you should check the capacitor, as you can see here. The capacitor should not be shorted to the ground in both sides. So let's put the black probe in the ground. Here we have ground. Everywhere in the cell phone motherboard we have ground. Okay, all this yellow part are ground. Also here the connectors cover are ground. Okay, so I put the black probe in the ground, and let's check, for example, this capacitor. Here in this side, this capacitor is connected to the ground, but in the other side it should not be connected to the ground, as you can see. So this capacitor is not connected, is not shorted. Let's check this, for example. In this side, good, but this side should be connected to the ground. This side should be connected to the ground, as you can see. But in this side, no. We can check, for example, this capacitor also, as you can see. In this side is connected to the ground, but in this side, no. Means this IC is good. But if you have any PF capacitor around IC that is connected to the ground in the both sides, means the IC is shorted, is bad. Okay, you can use this method in every IC in the cell phone motherboard. Let's check another cell phone motherboard, as you can see here. Okay, so for example, for this motherboard, as you can see here, we have this IC. We have many ICs, as you can see here. We have the processor, the RAM, and ICs. So for example, for this IC, we can check if this IC is bad or not by checking the PF capacitor around it. As you can see, this is a good PF capacitor, means good IC. If we check this capacitor with the ground, let's check here in this side, it's okay, it is connected to the ground, but in the second side it should not be connected to the ground. As you can see, good, so the IC is good. We can do the same for this, for example. So let's check this PF capacitor. Here it is connected to the ground, but in this side not. This is a good IC. Also for the processor, for the RAM, etc. So this is two ways that you can use to confirm if your ICs in the cell phone motherboard are good or not. The ICs and component references. I'm going to show you what is the reference, okay, and what is the purpose of knowing the ICs and component references. And also I will show you how you can replace a failed or a bad component. What is the right component that you should choose, okay? So as you can see here, for example, for this processor, this NVIDIA processor, as you can see here, so this is the reference for this IC, as you can see here. This is its reference, okay? As you can see, NPF748-S2P. This is its reference. Means if you have, for example, a bad processor like this, you should replace it with another processor with the same reference. Okay. The same thing, for example, let's assume, for example, that you have problem with this circuit, for example. What should you do? You should replace this circuit with another circuit with the same reference, as you can see here. Here also, as you can see. Do you see the reference of this IC? Here we have the reference. So let's see again. As you can see, we have the references for this IC. Okay? Also for these two ICs. So every component in the motherboard, as you can see, has a reference. Okay? Also for this, as you can see, this is inductor. This is inductor, as you can see. Okay? This is inductor. We can check this component using the multimeter. We should get a low resistance and we should hear a buzzer. Why? Because this is inductor. Okay? This is inductor. So let's check this inductor using the multimeter. Okay? So I have here my multimeter. Always I should put the multimeter to the buzzer option, as you can see, and then press the power button, as you can see. So let's check this inductor. Okay, let's check this inductor. So as you can see here we have one terminal and here we have the second terminal. So let's put this probe here in one terminal and put the other in the second terminal. As you can see, we get a low resistance and we get a buzzer. Why? Because this is what? Because this is inductor. Inductor is exactly like a fuse. Okay? So if you have, for example, a failed inductor, you should replace it with the same inductor as this. Okay? And about the capacitors and diodes, for example, for these capacitors, for example, as you can see here, you cannot find here the reference above this capacitors. Also for this, for example. So what should you do in this state? You should replace the capacitor with the same shape, okay, and with the same size. If, for example, you have a bad capacitor like this, you should replace it with another capacitor with the same size, okay, because we don't have here the reference. Or you can use the capacitor with the same reference, but you should check the circuit diagram or the schematic of this motherboard. By checking the schematic of the motherboard, you will find exactly the capacity or the reference for this ceramic capacitor. I will show you an example in the schematic. As you can see here, for example, as you can see here, we have here a ceramic capacitors. Exactly the same capacitor as this capacitor, the same. So in the schematic, as you can see here in the schematic, do you see we have the reference or the name of this capacitor. This is a ceramic capacitor C114, C110 with its characteristics. We have here 0.1 microfarad, 16 volt. So all this capacitor has the same value. Okay, so if you have a bad capacitor, for example, a bad ceramic capacitor, you can change it with the same size. If you change it with the same size, 100% it will have the same characteristics, means in terms of microfarad and voltage. Or you can look for the schematic of the motherboard and then go and check the characteristics of the failed capacitor, and then you can replace it with another capacitor with the same characteristic. Or even you can look for another motherboard. For example, let's assume, for example, that we find that this capacitor near to this coil or to this inductor is failed, is bad, means is shorted. Okay, what should you do? You can go and check the schematic and look for its characteristics, and then bring another with the same characteristics, or you can change it with another capacitor with the same size and also the same color. It can work. Or you can look for another motherboard the same as this motherboard and use the capacitor in that motherboard instead of this failed capacitor. Okay, so this is how we can replace this capacitor. The same working principle for the coils also. You can go to the schematic and check the characteristics of coil, but for the ICs, as you can see, for all ICs and MOSFETs, as you can see here, they have the characteristics above in their body. Okay, so let's check this motherboard also. As you can see, do you see this is the processor? Do you see the reference? A clear reference here. We have BCM 2155 2KFFBG. This is the reference. Okay, also for this it has the reference. Also for this, all ICs has or have references. So for the ICs and the chips, no problem. You can use the original reference and look for another IC with the same reference. Of course, if you have the IC failed, for example, if you have a failed processor, you should bring another processor with the same characteristics. Or you can use an interchangeable, processor, for example, or IC. But as I told to you, for the ceramic capacitors, for example, you can use, if you have a failed ceramic capacitor, you can look for its characteristics in the schematic, or even you can look for another motherboard with the same as the failed motherboard, and then take that capacitor and install it in the place of the failed capacitor. Or you can use another capacitor in any motherboard you have, but the condition is to be with the same size and same color. Okay, as you can see, because the capacitors has different colors. For example, for this, you see the color of this capacitor, for example, is not the same color, for example, as this, for example. Okay? So this is how you can find the reference of component in the motherboard. Okay? So if we check this motherboard, also the same working principle. All ICs and MOSFETs has the references. Also the connectors. The connectors also has references, as you can see. For this connector, as you can see, also has a reference. Okay? Now I will show you how to track signals in the motherboard. So as you can see here, for example, do you see this pad? This pad, if you focus here, for example, for this, here we have a path, as you can see. This path means this is connected to this PF capacitor. Okay, and also to this, as you can see, to this diode here. Okay, so this means the direction or the path signal or the bus. This is buses. Here also, as you can see, here we have buses. Okay, we have here another bus. Here we have buses, as you can see. So this is how you can check and you can track the signals. For example, here in this IC is connected to all these components around it. For example, for this IC, do you see all these buses? Means this IC connected to all these components, as you can see. So it's easy because this IC, we have these buses here, means all these PF capacitors are connected directly to this IC. So to check, for example, the serviceability of this IC, I can just check these capacitors around it. If I find a shorted capacitor, means the IC is bad. If I don't find any shorted capacitor here, means the IC is good. Okay, this is the easy way and the quick way to know whether an IC is bad or not, is to check the capacitor around it. If you find any shorted capacitor, means the IC is bad. Okay, so all this are buses. Okay, all this here are buses. So as you can see here, for this connector, for example, I know that these pins are connected to these PF capacitors. Why? Because we have these buses right here. Also, as you can see here, we have buses. Okay, so if you understand how to use these buses and this line, you can track, you can troubleshoot and repair any cell phone motherboard without using the schematic. Okay, just by following the buses. For example, for me, I know that this is connected to this. Why? Because I have this bus here. But without these buses, you cannot know if this is connected to this. So let's check using the multimeter. So as you can see, let's check the continuity. So if I put one probe here and put the other probe here, as you can see, I get the continuity. Why? Because I have this bus here, drawn here. Okay, so the same principle in the whole motherboard. You can use all these buses to check. Okay, to see how to test the cell phone components. So let's check the continuity. So the continuity is set correctly. Now we can check this motherboard. So the first thing is to check the soldering of all slots and components. So here we have the ground here, as you can see. So this is ground. Everywhere we have ground, as you can see. Okay, all these are ground. Okay, so let's check this PF capacitor, for example. We should, for the PF capacitor, always one terminal of the PF capacitor is connected to the ground for every chemical or ceramic capacitor. So for this, for example, capacitor, good. If you find that it is shorted, let's check it. As you see, if you hear a buzzer or you get a low resistance when you check in the PF capacitor, means the PF maybe capacitor is bad or the IC near to it is bad. For example, I can just check the PF capacitors near to the IC. If I get a low resistance like this or a buzzer, means the IC is bad, as you can see. Of course, the ceramic capacitors can also be bad, but you can remove it and test it outside of the motherboard. But always 90% when you find a shorted PF or ceramic capacitor, means the IC is bad. Okay, so here, as you can see, this is not a PF capacitor. As you can see in the multimeter, here we have a low resistance. This is inductor. All those, as you can see, are inductors. So as you can see, this is inductor and this is PF capacitors. Okay, here we have PF capacitors, but for those are inductor. So if I check, for example, this PF capacitor, as you can see, no buzzer, no buzzer, no buzzer. But for this inductors, if you check it like this, as you can see, we have a buzzer. The same for this, also the same for this. Because the inductor is just a wire, is exactly like a fuse. So here, of course, we have another inductor. So let's check it. As you can see here, okay. So of course we have switches here. Always the switches, you will find that one pin of the switch is connected to the ground. Let's put this black probe in the ground and check these two switches. Always one probe or one terminal should be connected to the ground, as you can see. Okay, but as you can see, we have here chemical capacitor. We can check this chemical capacitor. As you see, oh, we have here a problem. Here we have some problem here over here. So let's check it again. Now is good. Maybe I touch something here. Maybe I touch the ground, because here we have the ground. Maybe I touch here. Of course, this chemical capacitor connected to the ground in this terminal. As you can see, here we have the ground. As you see, it is connected to the ground. But if I test it like this, it is good. Okay. For example, this IC. If I want to check whether this IC is good or not, I can just touch the IC when I power the cell phone or the motherboard. I can touch the IC. If the IC is hot, means it is bad. But I can just check the PF capacitors around it. Okay. I can just check the PF capacitors around it. If I find a shorted PF capacitor or ceramic capacitor. So I mean by PF capacitor, this capacitor, as you see, this is a picofarad capacitor. We call this PF capacitors or ceramic capacitors. Okay, so I can just check the capacitors around the IC. So let's check, for example, this capacitor. So now we have a resistance. If you find a low resistance or a shorted ceramic capacitor, means the IC is bad. You should replace the IC. Let's check this IC. For example, we have here a chemical capacitor, as you see. Good. Always the chemical capacitor is connected to the ground in one side, in one terminal. As you see, it is connected to the ground in this side, as you can see in the multimeter. As you see, we have a low resistance, but this part should not be connected to the ground. It is connected to the IC, to data lines of the IC. But if you find this chemical capacitor is shorted in the both sides, means you have problem in the IC. You should replace the IC. Okay? Why I focus on ceramic capacitors around ICs? Because the majority of failure are short. failure is the ICs. Okay, so for this IC, for example, if we want to check it, we can just check this ceramic capacitor near to it. As you can see, automatically this is a good IC. It's not a shorted IC. Okay, now I will teach you some symbols. So this symbol, as you can see here, is for a ceramic capacitor. Okay, this is ceramic capacitor or PF capacitor. Okay, but for this symbol, as you can see, or even this symbol like this, means a polarized capacitor or chemical capacitor. Okay, this is a polarized capacitor or chemical capacitor. Okay, when you find, so this symbol is for diode. Okay, D is for diode. This is here you can find C or even PC. This you can find diode. Okay, so we have this kind of diode and we have another kind of diode. This is its symbol. This is a Zener diode. Okay, so for the resistance you can find its symbol is this with R or PR. So this is a resistor. You can even find a symbol with this shape, as you can see. This is also a resistor. Okay, so for this symbol, as you can see, this is inductor L. Okay, so this is inductor. Okay, so for the IC you can find a square like this or a rectangle like this. So this symbols is for ICs. Okay, so this symbol, as you can see, like this, is for the crystal or the crystal oscillator. Okay, so this is crystal oscillator. Okay, you can find X or Y, its symbol. Okay, etc. Okay, so this is the main important symbols that you should understand. And the main important tip here is that always the ceramic capacitor around the IC are connected to the ground in one side. So if you find that a PF capacitor is shorted to the ground in the both sides, means what? The IC should be replaced, is bad. Okay, to see how to diagnose a cell phone motherboard. Okay, so the first step is a visual inspection. So always before doing anything on the cell phone motherboard, you should first check all parts and components of the motherboard. For example, you can begin with the power jack. You should check the power jack. Okay, check inside the power jack. Okay, check all parts, as you can see also here, these pins. Check the soldering. You can then go and check the battery connector. Okay, check the SIM card. So you can go and check switches, as you can see. This is just a visual inspection. And check all the ICs. Okay, so you should check the body of the ICs, because sometimes you can find a bad IC, a burnt out IC. Okay, then check the CMD component like capacitors and inductors, as you can see here. You can also check the motherboard itself. The motherboard can be broken, so you should check the motherboard itself. Okay, and then check all connectors, as you can see, like these connectors, for example. For this motherboard, as you can see here also, this is the power jack. In the power jack, always you should check inside the power jack and the solder, as you can see here. Also this part, as you can see here. After that, you should check whether you have 5 volt or not in the power jack. So when you connect the USB connector, as you can see here in the power jack, you should go and look for the 5 volt in the next capacitor to the power jack. As you can see, here we have a ceramic capacitor. When you plug the USB connector, you can find here 5 volt. If you didn't find 5 volt, means there is a problem in the power jack. Maybe these pins are not soldered correctly, or this part inside the power jack is broken. Okay, so as you can see here, also for this motherboard here, we don't have PF capacitor, but if we see the other side, as you can see, we have here the SMD component. If you check this capacitor or this, you will find here 5 volt, because this component are near to the power jack. So always after the visual inspection, you should check whether you have 5 volt or not. Okay, then you should check the ICs. You should check if the serviceability of ICs and chips of the motherboard. How can you check this ICs and chips? Easy. You should just check the ceramic capacitor around the IC. If you find that the ceramic capacitor around the IC are not shorted to the ground, means the IC is good. I will show you how using the multimeter. So we have here our multimeter. So let's first select the buzzer or the continuity option and then press the power button, as you can see. So now, for example, let's check the serviceability of this IC. Because you cannot check the pins of IC, we don't have here the pin of IC. This is an integrated circuit. But we have here the component, the component around the IC, especially the ceramic capacitor or the PF capacitor. So if you find that this ceramic capacitor or this or anyone here is shorted, means the IC is bad. Because always any ceramic capacitor around the IC is connected to the ground in one terminal, just in one terminal, not in both. So let's check, for example. So here we have the ground, as you can see. I have the ground everywhere. So I will put the black probe here in the ground, okay? And then let's check, for example, this capacitor. I will find that any capacitor here is connected to the ground in one side just. So let's check this, for example. So the capacitor is connected to the ground, as you can see in the multimeter, low resistance, okay? But should not be connected to the ground in this side, as you can see. Good. Means this capacity is good. Means the IC is not shorted to the ground, because this terminal, this side is connected to the IC, and this is connected to the ground. When the IC is shorted, you will find also this side connected to the ground. Also, when you check the capacitor like this, you will find a continuity like this, okay? So let's check this also. The same working principle. Let's check. Here, one side is connected to the ground, the other side no. Here, one side is connected to the ground, the other side no. Here, so this side connected to the ground, this no. Here, this is connected to the ground, but for this no, okay? But if you find that a chemical capacitor, for example, is connected to the ground in both sides, means what? Means the IC is bad, okay? You can use this method in every IC circuit. For this, for example, let's check this PF capacitor. So here we have the ground, as you can see. So let's check here the side that is connected to the ground, but this should not be connected to the ground, as you can see. Okay, this connected to the ground, this should need to be connected to the ground, as you can see. Okay, I will show you this techniques and these steps in the schematic. So let's go to the paper. I will show you all this in a schematic. Okay, let's assume that this is IC. We have, for example, an IC. This is, for example, IC. Okay, this is IC. So here, for example, we have the VCC. Let's assume that here we have the VCC. For example, let's assume that the VCC equal to 5 volt. Here, for example, we have the ground. Okay. For example, here we have enable signal, etc. So for every AC, you will find some capacitors that is connected to the ground, exactly like this. Many capacitors that is connected to the ground. You can find, for example, here another capacitor and that is connected to the ground. This is ceramic capacitors. Okay, this is ceramic capacitors. So all these capacitors should be connected to the ground in one side, in this side, for example, for this, but in this side, no. So let's assume that this capacitor, for example, if you check the continuity of this capacitor, you get a continuity or a buzzer. Means what? Means also this side is connected to the ground. Where? Through, as you can see, the IC. Always to check whether the IC is good or not, you should just check the capacitor near to this IC. If you find the capacitor are shorted to the ground in both sides, means the IC is bad. You should replace it with another IC with the same reference. Okay? You can also check the IC using just your finger. Okay? You can just feel the heat of this IC. If you find that the heat of this IC is not normal, is increased, I mean the IC is very hot, means the IC is bad. Okay? So you have 3 methods or 3 ways that you can use to check whether the IC is good or not. By feeling the heat of the IC, if the heat is increased, if it is hot, means the IC is bad. Or you can check the PF capacitor around the IC to find that one of this capacitor is shorted to the ground in both sides, means the IC is bad. You can also check the body of this IC. If you find something in the body of this IC, for example, a burn or a hole or something like that, or a crack, means the IC is bad. I will show you a bad IC. Okay, I will show you a bad IC in another motherboard of the laptop. So as you can see here, this is an example of a bad IC. Do you see this IC? This is an IC that is burned out. As you can see, we have here a hole. This IC should be replaced. Okay, so always you should check the body of the IC. The body of the IC should be clean and should be normal. Okay, now I want to speak about the connectors. So the connectors in the motherboard, the connectors and the slots in the cell phone motherboard is among the failure that is repeated frequently. For example, the battery connector, okay, or the battery connector, for example. Always I get some cell phones that cannot be charged or that they have a problem in the charging circuit, and I find that sometimes that the connector of the battery is good, its pins are good, but there is a problem here. One of these 3 pins, for example, are cracked inside, or problem in the soldering. So always you should check the continuity between this part and this part. I will show you how. Because if there is a broken pin, you will not get a buzzer or a continuity when checking it. I will show you how. So let's first put the multimeter to the buzzer option and then press the power button, as you can see. So now let's check the continuity. So the continuity is good. So you should always check between this part and this part, as you can see. So let's check. So for this pin it is good. Let's check the other pin, as you can see. Good. Let's check the third one, as you can see. Good. But sometimes I find that even if I check, for example, this terminal to this terminal, I don't find or I don't get a continuity. You know why? Because always sometimes this, as you see, pin here or terminal can be broken inside. So please pay attention to this step. And also, this is one of the majority failure in the cell phone motherboard. This is the connector, the charge connector. So always if you have a problem like this problem, the charge connector problem, the first step is to check inside of the connector. If you find that this part is failed, is bad, is distorted or not in good shape, so you should replace the whole connector. But pay attention. If you want to replace the connector, you should get another connector with the same size and same characteristics, okay? Because the connectors are not the same. As you can see, for example, here we have this connector and we have this. Do you see this? It has this shape, and this it has another shape. So always, if you want to replace the charge connector in a cell phone, you should use the same connector. So if you find that here inside the connector is good, so you should check these pins. As you see, maybe the soldering is bad. You should make another soldering, a new soldering, and also check here the ground. This part should be checked, okay? And you can move the connector like this, okay? The same for this. As you can see, always you should check this part inside. If this part is good, then the second step is to check these pins, okay? This is pins where we have 5 volt and ground and data lines, okay? So you should check the soldering here. You can even make a new solder here, okay? And also check here ground, this part for ground, and move the connector like this. If you have a bad connector, you should replace it. Of course, if this part is good, you should just make another soldering here, okay? The same also for this connector. This is audio connector, okay? As you can see, with the same working principle, you can check inside it. If it is good, then check all these pins, check the soldering here, okay? So the same for the SIM connector. As you can see, for the SIM connector also, this pins can be broken. The same working principle with this. You can check these pins. As you can see here, always I get some problem like this problem in the battery connector, in the charge connector, and in the SIM connector, okay? So always you should put the multimeter to the buzzer option and check the continuity, as you can see. And then, so always, as you can see here, we have here 3 pins, as you can see, and here we have 3 terminals, soldered terminals, and here we have other pins and 3 terminals. So pay attention, this pin here or this yellow one is not connected to this. We can check, as you can see, is not connected. Do you see? Those pins are not connected. But you can check between this part here, as you can see, and this pin, okay? And also this part and this pin, and also this part and this pin. The same here, check between this and this, this and this, and this, as you can see. And for the same connector, check the soldering. If you have a bad soldering, make another soldering. Okay. Also for this, if you have a bad soldering, make another soldering. So I want to add that also for the switches, the same working principle. I get some cell phone boards with bad switches, and always I find a broken switch or a bad soldering. You should just check the switch. If the switch is good, then check the soldering. For the switch, there is two type of failure: a bad switch itself or a bad soldering. Okay, if you have a good switch, then check the soldering. Okay, so this is for the switches. So to check whether the switch is good or not, what should you do? You can just put the multimeter in the ground and into a high pin here, and then press the switch. If you hear a buzzer, then the switch is good. So right now I will show you how to check any switch in any cell phone motherboard. So how can we know if the switch is good or not? Simple. So I can just put the black probe here in the ground. Let's put the black probe here, and then go to one pin here, the high pin, the pin where we have the voltage, and then put the other probe. If I press the switch, I should get a buzzer. I should get a continuity. So let's check. As you see, do you see? Means the switch is good. When you press the switch, you should hear a buzzer. You should get a continuity in the multimeter, as you can see. Okay, so always put the black probe in the ground, everywhere in the ground, because we have the ground everywhere in the motherboard, here or even here. Okay, so put the black probe in the ground and look for the pin number 1. To find the right pin, you can just check. Here we have the ground, so this pin is connected to the ground. This is ground, but this pin is not. This is a voltage pin where we have the voltage. So let's put the red probe in this pin and then press the switch. As you can see, if you get a buzzer, then the switch is good. If you don't get a buzzer, means the switch is bad. You should replace it. We're going to see the cell phone parts or components. So I will teach you the basics and the cell phone in general. By understanding this course, okay, you can understand any cell phone, because I give to you in this course all things in general. I will give you the working principle of the cell phone motherboard. As you can see here, you will find in the cell phone motherboard or in the smartphone motherboard always big chips, as you can see. For example, this is the processor. As you can see, this is a big chip. Always the big chip, you will find processor and the RAM, and this is ICs. This square shape are ICs. Okay, and here you will find that for every circuit, for example, the IC for the power, okay, this is the power IC. For every circuit in the cell phone motherboard, it contains a controller. A controller is the IC. And of course, as you see, we have here some MOSFETs, as you can see. And of course, we have some PF capacitor. So this is a ceramic capacitor. This capacitor are ceramic capacitor. And for this, for example, this is inductor. Okay, this is inductor. You should differentiate between inductor and ceramic capacitor. So this is inductor, and those are ceramic capacitor, and also those are inductors. So to check inductors, you should put the multimeter to the buzzer option or to the continuity option, and then check the inductors. If you hear a buzzer or you get a continuity or a low resistance, means the inductors are good. But for the PF capacitor, for example, you should not hear any buzzer. Okay? So here this is the same slot. As you can see, always when you want to check the same slot, you should check this pins, as you can see, and check also the soldering. The same also for the battery connector, as you can see. Always you should check these pins, as you can see, and also check the soldering here. Okay? Here switch also, when you have a problem with switch, as you can see, you should check always the soldering, because the switch can be desoldered. Okay, always you should check the soldering. And as you can see here, for example, for this IC, how can you check if this IC is bad or not? If the IC is bad, you will find that the PF capacitor near to the IC are shorted to the ground. Okay? Or if you touch the IC with your finger, you will feel that the IC is hot, is very hot. If the head of the IC increases, means the IC is bad. This is a rule in electronic. When an IC is bad in every motherboard, it will be hot. So as you can see here, in this motherboard also, as you can see, this is, as you see, we have here a circuit. This yellow line means this is first circuit where we have the processor and the RAM. Okay, here as you see, we have many PF capacitors. Always we find capacitors, a lot of ceramic capacitor, because this is the filtering capacitor. Because in the cell phone, the voltage should be continuous, should be a filtered voltage and a pure voltage. Okay, so here we have capacitors, we have the processor and the RAM. Here we have another circuit, as you can see here, over here. This is the networking and the Wi-Fi. As you can see here in this symbol, you can find symbols in some ICs. So this is the networking circuit. Here we have another circuit, as you can see here. As you can see, the power management IC. Okay, and this is some connectors like the SIM slot, the camera, and other connectors, as you can see. Okay, so for this motherboard, as you can see here, also the same working principle. Always we find a lot of capacitors. For this motherboard, because the first thing to do in every motherboard is a visual inspection. Okay, always do a visual inspection before doing anything. If you want to repair or to troubleshoot a cell phone motherboard, always you should begin with visual inspection, because the visual inspection you can detect the failed components by just looking to the motherboard. As you can see, for example, here we have a problem here, as you can see. Just with the visual inspection, you can note that this component, as you see, is cracked, is bad, without testing anything in the motherboard. So the visual inspection is good to begin with. Okay, here of course in this motherboard we have some big capacitor. This capacitor, this is a chemical capacitor. We find this kind of capacitor in laptop motherboard. I can show you a laptop motherboard with this capacitor, exactly like this capacitor for the laptop motherboard. Okay, so this is a chemical capacitors. Okay, this is a kind of chemical capacitors. Okay, so here also we have many components, some inductors. This is inductor, of course. This is a PF capacitor. This is a resistor, a current sense resistor. Okay, and we have many MOSFETs here, etc. I will show you right now how you can check the switches in the cell phone motherboard. So to check the serviceability of any switch in the laptop motherboard, as you can see here, you should first set the multimeter to the buzzer option and there press the power button. The switch contains two pins, okay? The ground and the high pin, the pin where we have voltage. Okay, so to check the serviceability of this switch, what should we do? We can just put the black probe in the ground and then look for the high pin. So here we have the ground, this is the ground, so this is the high pin, as you can see. So I should put the red probe in the high pin, as you can see. If I press the switch, as you can see, I hear a buzzer, okay? Or I get a continuity, as you can see in the multimeter. So when you press the switch, as you can see, we get a low resistance in the multimeter. Means the switch is worked correctly. Okay, so you should just put the black probe in the ground. We have here the ground everywhere in the motherboard, as you can see, and then put the red probe in the high pin of the switch. The pin contains two switches, okay, and then press the switch. If you press the switch and you get a buzzer or a low resistance here in the multimeter, as you can see, means the switch is okay. But if you press the switch and you didn't get a continuity or a low resistance in the multimeter, means the switch is failed. You should replace it. So to summarize, as you can see here, this is the cell phone motherboard. I want to tell you that if you want to master the cell phone motherboard repairing, I advise you to learn the working principle of the laptop motherboard, as you can see. You know what? Because the cell phone motherboard and the laptop motherboard are the same in the working principle. If you can understand the laptop motherboard where we have a big chips, as you can see, the processor, the North bridge or the GMCH, the graphic card, the RAM, the ICH, we have inductors, as you can see. Do you see inductors? The same. We have also inductors, as you can see here, into cell phone motherboards, as you can see. This is inductor. This is a cell phone motherboard, okay? Here we have inductor, here we have inductor, the same working principle. So if you can understand the working principle of the laptop motherboard, as you can see, you can go deeper into understanding the cell phone motherboard. You can even go and check the tablet motherboard, as you can see. This is for the tablet, as you can see. We have here a tablet, okay? This is a tablet, a broken screen. You see? You can also begin with this, okay? So as you can see here, this is the tablet motherboard and this is the cell phone motherboard. Here also, as you can see, the same working principle. We have the processor, we have the BIOS, as you can see here. We have inductors, we have ICs, as you can see here also in this tablet. This is the webcam, the camera. Here we have the BIOS, as you can see, processor. This is the oscillator. We have here the crystal oscillator, also crystal oscillator. As you see, this is the ICs and the ceramic capacitor, and now around the ICs we have here the lead. So I advise you to learn the basics of laptop motherboard and also tablet motherboard, and then you can go to specialize in cell phone motherboard. If you understand laptop motherboard and tablet motherboard, as you can see here, okay, where we have the big ICs, you can easily master and understand anything in the cell phone motherboard, because the working principle is the same. As you see, always we find IC, as you can see. So this is the cell phone motherboard. We have here IC, a power management IC. We have here ceramic capacitor around this IC. We have some MOSFETs and we have inductor. Okay, so if we go to the laptop motherboard, we will find the same working principle as you can see here. Do you see? We have an IC here. We have PF capacitors around the IC, as you can see here. Okay? We have also another IC. We have PF capacitors. Okay? So here, as you can see also, we have an IC here. We have PF capacitors or ceramic capacitor around it. We have MOSFETs. Okay? So the same working principle if we go also to the tablet. We have IC, we have PF capacitors. IC, we have ceramic capacitors, and we have a transistor. Okay? Also, if we go to this tablet, as you can see here, do you see this IC? Do you see the PF capacitors? Always the same working principle. To know whether this IC is good or not, you can just check the PF capacitors around the IC. We have here inductor. Okay, so this is my advice. If you want to master the cell phone motherboard, you should first begin by understanding the laptop motherboard, where we have big ICs and big chips. Okay, and then you can go and learn the basics of tablet motherboards, exactly as this, for example. Okay, and then the last step is to master the cell phone motherboard, because you will gain a lot of information in the laptop motherboard. You will understand everything about circuit, about the relationship between chips and circuits. You will understand the power management ICs like 3 volt and 5 volt, the charge IC, etc. The random access memory. Because in the laptop motherboard, as you can see, for example, here we have the processor and here we have the RAM, as you see. But in the cell phone motherboard, we have the processor and we have the RAM. Okay? So it's not easy for the beginner to understand the cell phone motherboard in the first time. That's why to begin with the laptop motherboard, it will be better. Okay? So this is my advice for you before going and studying cell phone motherboard. Try to begin with the big motherboards for the laptop motherboard or even for the desktop or computer motherboard. Okay. So we can see that the motherboard of the cell phone has the same working principle as the motherboard of a laptop computer, as you can see. This is a laptop computer motherboard where we find the processor, the GMCH, the graphic card, the ICH, the RAMs, some MOSFETs, ICs. Here we have capacitors, inductors, chemical capacitors, etc. As you can see. The working principle of the cell phone motherboard is the same. The difference is that this is a small motherboard, means the design will be different, but the same working principle. Okay? So this is the board, like the PCB design. This is the PCB board. As you can see, here we have chips, as you can see, and ICs. And over here we have the SMD component, like capacitors, for example, resistors, diodes, inductors, etc. Of course, we have some connectors, as you can see here, and of course we have some slots, okay, and also switches, etc. Okay, so this is just an introduction before going deeper into understanding the cell phone motherboard. Let's see, for example, this also always the same working principle, as you can see here. This is the PCB board, as you can see. Here we have always chips, processor, RAM, etc. Here we have some ICs, as you can see. Here this is the SMD component, like capacitor, as you can see. Here we have some MOSFETs, diodes, okay, slot, as you can see. We have the camera, so some connectors, switches, also here connectors, okay. So for every component here it has a reference, okay. So as you can see here, also in this motherboard, as you can see, so always the same working principle, but there is a difference between each motherboard. Here the same working principle, as you see, we have here NVIDIA. This is the graphic, exactly like the laptop motherboard. This is a processor, especially for graphic and also for processing data, etc. Here, of course, we have some ICs. We have some component like capacitors, as you can see, MOSFETs, okay. And as you can see, we have this shield. Always this means circuits. For example, for this here, this is one circuit. Here we have another circuit. Here we have another circuit, etc. Okay. So for this motherboard, it has two sides. It contains component in both sides, as you can see here. This is the camera. This is the SIM slot, as you can see. Here we have some pads, as you can see. Okay, we have crystal oscillator. We have some lead, etc. Okay. And for this, as you can see here, this is normally an old cell phone. As you can see, this is a very small motherboard. It has just this motherboard, as you can see, where we have some slots, as you can see, the same working principle. This IC is the monitor controller or the screen controller, as you can see. Here we have a battery. This is a battery. So this motherboard contain, or this phone contain a big battery, as you can see here. Okay. The architecture of the motherboard, of the cell phone motherboard, is divided into parts, as you can see. This means a part or a circuit. So we can see that this, as you can see, this part, this yellow color, means a circuit. For example, here, this part is the control part, where we have the processor and the RAM, as you can see. So for this part, for example, as you can see here, this is for the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, etc. Okay, this part. Always this triangle or this rectangle or square means a circuit, as you can see. Here also we have another circuit. Here we have another circuit, as you can see. Okay, so each rectangular means a circuit, as you can see. The same also for this motherboard, as you can see here. So this is a circuit. Here we have a circuit. This is a network and Wi-Fi Bluetooth circuit here. Okay, here this is the processor with the RAM. This is another circuit over here. Here, as you can see, we have another circuit. Here we have another circuit. Okay, so always the cell phone board is divided into many circuits, and this yellow lines determine the limit of the circuit. Okay, the same also for this, as you can see here. This is the control circuit where we have the processor, as you can see. Here we have another circuit. Here this is another circuit. Here of course we have another circuit. Okay, also in the other side the same working principle. Okay.